JD Vance sat in the courtroom, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. The judge, a stern-looking man with graying hair and a scowl that had likely sent shivers down many a defendant's spine, peered over his glasses at the senator. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that only comes when a man of power and prestige finds himself on the receiving end of the gavel. The judge leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly on the desk. "Senator Vance, I don't think you fully understand the gravity of your actions," he said. "You may be a public figure, but that does not put you above the law." JD remained composed, his face unreadable, but there was a glint in his eye, one that only those who truly knew him would recognize. He wasn't just sitting there taking the judge's words at face value. He was calculating, processing, and, most importantly, waiting. "This court finds you in contempt," the judge continued. "You are hereby fined $50,000 to be paid immediately." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, cameras clicked, and the whispers of spectators filled the air. JD Vance, the man who had built his reputation on intelligence, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to his principles, was now being fined in open court. But instead of reacting with outrage, instead of showing any sign of defeat, JD simply leaned forward, clasped his hands together, and tilted his head slightly. His voice, steady and measured, cut through the noise. "Your Honor," he said, "before I comply with this ruling, I'd like to ask one simple question." The judge narrowed his eyes. "And what would that be?" "On what legal grounds have you fined me?" JD asked. His tone wasn't disrespectful, but there was an unmistakable confidence in it. It was the kind of question that suggested he already knew the answer but wanted to hear the judge say it aloud. The judge scoffed. "You have repeatedly refused to comply with this court's request for documentation, despite multiple orders to do so." JD nodded slowly as if absorbing the statement. Then he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "That's interesting," he said, "because, as you'll see in this file, I submitted every required document 2 weeks before the deadline." The judge's face froze. Reporters leaned forward. The room fell eerily silent. The judge hesitated, then reluctantly picked up the folder. He flipped through the pages, his eyes darting across the documents. His frown deepened. JD watched him carefully, his expression unreadable. "You'll also notice," JD continued, "that I have email confirmations from your clerk's office acknowledging receipt of these documents. The timestamps are clear, and the records show they were properly filed." The judge's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the papers a little too hard. The cameras caught everything. The way his face lost color, the way his eyes darted from the documents to JD, and the way his lips pressed into a thin line. "So, I ask again," JD said smoothly, "on what legal grounds have you fined me?" The key. Courtroom was dead silent now. The tension was unbearable. The judge exhaled sharply, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It appears there may have been a clerical error," he admitted begrudgingly. JD smiled faintly. "A clerical error that resulted in a $50,000 fine against a sitting U.S. senator? That's quite the mistake." The judge cleared his throat, obviously irritated at being put on the spot. "I will review the situation." JD leaned back in his chair. "Take your time, Your Honor." There was something about his tone that sent another wave of murmurs through the courtroom. It was subtle, but the message was clear. JD Vance wasn't just defending himself, he was exposing something much bigger. The judge, clearly flustered, shuffled through the documents. "Again, I will rescind the fine until further review," he finally said, his voice tight. JD nodded graciously. "I appreciate that, Your Honor, but there's one more thing." The judge's head snapped up. "I'd like to enter these documents into the official court record," JD continued. "That way there can be no future misunderstandings." The judge clenched his jaw. He had no choice. "So ordered," he muttered. JD glanced at the reporters in the gallery. He knew exactly what he was doing. The public would see this moment for what it was. Not just an attempted fine, but a blatant attempt at punishing a man who had done nothing wrong. And now, it had all blown up in the judge's face. As JD gathered his things, he turned to his legal team and spoke just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You'd think a judge would check his facts before issuing fines," he said casually. The room erupted in hushed whispers. The judge's face darkened, but he said nothing. As JD walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashed, reporters scrambled, and legal analysts whispered among themselves. This wasn't just a victory. It was a masterclass in legal strategy. And for those who thought JD Vance was just another politician, they had just learned the hard way. He was much, much more than that. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed JD Vance, their microphones extended like swords, eager to capture his next words. The crisp autumn air did little to cool the fire of curiosity burning among them. "Senator Vance! Senator Vance!" a reporter shouted above the rest. "Do you believe this fine was an intentional attempt to undermine you?" JD adjusted his tie and offered a calm smile. "I'll let the facts speak for themselves," he said smoothly. "A judge attempted to fine me based on missing documents that were, in fact, submitted on time. The records prove it. Now you tell me, was it incompetence or was it something else?" The reporters exchanged quick glances. They knew what he was implying, but needed him to say it outright. "Are you suggesting judicial bias?" another journalist pressed. JD let the question hang in the air for a moment, then said, "I'm suggesting that when legal proceedings start looking like political theater, the American people have every right to ask questions." The answer was masterful, firm, but not reckless. It planted the idea without handing his opponents an easy attack. A third reporter stepped forward. "Senator, this judge has ruled against other conservative figures in the past. Do you think this is part of a larger trend?" JD exhaled, his expression unreadable. "I think trust in our institutions is at an all-time low, and moments like this don't help." A murmur ran through the press pool. JD had just turned the judge's blunder into a national conversation about judicial fairness. As he walked toward his waiting car, a staffer whispered to him, "Sir, the judge's office just released a statement. They're calling this a miscommunication and saying the fine was issued in error." JD chuckled. "Of course they are, but the damage is already done." Inside the courthouse, the judge sat fuming in his chambers. His hands trembled as he read the latest headlines popping up on his phone. JD Vance exposes legal fumble in open court. Judge finds senator without evidence, backtracks under pressure. Clerical error or political attack. The truth behind JD Vance's courtroom clash. His career had been long, filled with decisions that had gone unquestioned, but today, for the first time, he had been outmaneuvered in his own courtroom, and by a senator, no less. He clenched his fists. This wasn't over. Meanwhile, JD sat in his office, sipping his coffee as he watched the media frenzy unfold. His phone buzzed with messages, supporters congratulating him, legal experts weighing in, and a few Washington insiders warning him that he had made a powerful enemy. JD wasn't worried. He had faced worse. Besides, he had always believed in one simple truth. When you know the law better than those who try to use it against you, they'll always be the ones left scrambling. And today had been proof of that. The fallout from the courtroom incident rippled through the political and legal worlds like a shockwave. By the next morning, news channels were flooded with coverage of JD Vance's masterful takedown of the judge's flawed ruling. Legal analysts debated whether the judge's actions were a simple mistake or something more sinister. Political commentators on both sides of the aisle weighed in, some calling JD a hero for exposing judicial overreach, while others scrambled to downplay the situation. JD, however, remained as calm as ever. He knew the real battle wasn't in the headlines, it was behind the scenes, where the true power struggles happened. As he sat in his office sipping his morning coffee, his phone buzzed. His chief of staff, Mark Reynolds, stood by the door, phone in hand. "Sir, the judge's office just announced a full internal review of their processes," Mark said, barely able to hide his smirk. "Looks like they're in damage control mode." JD chuckled, setting his cup down. "They have no choice. The public saw the truth." Mark nodded. "Still, we've been getting word that certain legal circles aren't happy. There's talk that some high-profile figures want to make this a bigger issue, maybe try to turn the heat back on you." JD leaned back in his chair, considering. He had seen this playbook before. When a politician embarrassed the wrong people, the system found ways to push back. He wasn't naive. "Let them try," JD said finally. "If they want a legal fight, they'll find out I don't back down." Over the next few days, the judge's allies in the legal community did exactly what JD expected. Op-eds appeared accusing him of grandstanding and disrespecting the court. A few legal scholars went on TV, subtly questioning whether JD had intentionally escalated the situation for political gain. But JD wasn't rattled. Instead of responding with outrage, he did something far more effective. He let the facts keep speaking for themselves. At a press conference on Capitol Hill, a reporter tried to corner him. "Senator Vance, critics say your behavior in court was inappropriate. Some believe you intentionally embarrassed the judge to score political points. How do you respond?" JD smiled. "I'd ask those critics a simple question. Do they believe judges should issue fines without checking the facts? Because that's what happened here. And if calling attention to that makes some people uncomfortable, maybe they should be asking, why?" The response was direct, undeniable. Even some of his usual detractors had to admit he had a point. Back in the courthouse, the judge was feeling the pressure. His office had been flooded with inquiries. His reputation, once untouchable, was now being questioned. His allies tried to spin the story, but the truth was simple. He had tried to fine a sitting U.S. senator without legal grounds, and he had been caught. One afternoon in a private meeting, a senior judicial official sat across from him, hands folded. "This situation is escalating," the official said bluntly. "People are calling for oversight. We need to contain this before it becomes a national scandal." The judge scowled. "You think I don't know that? Then you know what needs to be done." The next day, a carefully worded statement was released. The judge officially rescinded the fine, acknowledging that a clerical oversight had led to the issue. He expressed his utmost respect for JD Vance and reaffirmed his commitment to fair and unbiased rulings. But it was too late. The damage was done. JD's approval began to climb. Voters saw him as a fighter, someone who wouldn't back down, even against the legal establishment. Conservative commentators hailed the incident as proof that the system was stacked against outsiders like JD and that he was the kind of leader who could take it on. Meanwhile, the judge faced scrutiny like never before. Journalists began digging into his past rulings, looking for patterns. It didn't take long before they found something troubling. Several past cases where he had issued questionable fines, rulings that disproportionately affected conservatives or political outsiders. The story grew legs, and soon, national outlets were asking a once unthinkable question. Was this judge politically compromised? JD, of course, remained above the fray. He didn't need to call for an investigation or demand the judge's resignation. The public was doing that on its own. Instead, he focused on his work, doubling down on his legislative priorities and letting the media storm rage on without him. One afternoon, he sat in a private meeting with a few trusted advisors. Mark, his chief of staff, placed a folder on the desk in front of him. "It's happening," Mark said. "A formal ethics complaint has been filed against the judge. There's enough pressure now that they can't ignore it." JD exhaled, nodding slowly. He had seen this coming from the moment the judge issued that fine. It was never about just one ruling. It was about a culture of unchecked power. "Do we push for more?" one advisor asked. JD thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. We let the system work. If this judge is removed, it won't be because I called for it. It'll be because the people demanded it." That was the key difference between JD and his critics. They played political games. He played the long game. Weeks passed, and the fallout continued. The ethics investigation moved forward, and whispers in Washington suggested the judge was considering early retirement to avoid further scrutiny. JD, meanwhile, kept his focus on policy, refusing to gloat. That only made him look even stronger. One evening, as he prepared to leave his office, Mark approached him again, holding his phone. "Sir, you're going to want to see this." JD took the phone and scanned the screen. A news alert flashed across it. Breaking. Federal judge announces retirement amid ethics probe. JD handed the phone back and picked up his coat. "Well," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I guess the system still works after all." Mark grinned. "Looks like you won." JD shook his head. "No," he said. "The American people did." With that, he stepped out into the night, knowing that this battle was over, but there would always be another fight ahead, and he was more than ready for it. As JD Vance walked out of his office that evening, the cool night air felt invigorating. He had faced off against the judicial system and emerged not only unscathed, but stronger. But he knew better than to rest on his laurels. Politics, like the courtroom, was a battlefield. One victory simply led to the next fight. The headlines the next morning were relentless. Judge resigns under scrutiny. JD Vance's legal genius exposes corruption. Victory for the people. Vance's stand against judicial overreach pays off. Who else has been targeted? Calls for more investigations grow. JD's phone buzzed constantly, calls from allies congratulating him, from media outlets requesting interviews, and from political strategists asking what came next. But he had no interest in parading around as a victor. He had exposed something much larger than one bad judge. He had highlighted a problem in the system itself. Sitting in his office, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Mark. "What do you think they'll do now?" Mark smirked. "They're scrambling. A few establishment voices are trying to spin this as an isolated case, but the public isn't buying it. People are asking questions. Who else has been issuing rulings like this? How many others have abused their power?" JD nodded. "Good. That means the fight isn't over." A knock at the door interrupted them. A junior staffer stepped in, holding a thick envelope. "Sir, this was just delivered from a law firm in D.C., she said, handing it to JD. He opened it and scanned the first few pages. His brow furrowed slightly. "What is it?" Mark asked. JD exhaled. "It's a lawsuit. Looks like some activist group is trying to hit me with a legal challenge over my comments about judicial accountability." Mark scoffed. "They're really that desperate?" JD chuckled, shaking his head. "They don't get it, do they? I want this fight." The establishment's mistake was thinking they could intimidate him with legal maneuvers. But they had already seen what happened when he stepped into a courtroom. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. JD picked up his pen, tapped it against the table, and smirked. Let's see how much they really know about the law. Over the next few weeks, the legal battle against JD Vance escalated. The activist group behind the lawsuit claimed that JD had undermined judicial integrity by calling out the judge's actions and pushing for greater accountability in the ETI courts. Of course, JD knew this wasn't about integrity. It was about silencing him. Mark walked into JD's office one afternoon, tossing a thick legal briefing onto his desk. "They're trying to drag this out," he said. "They want this to be a long, ugly process. The goal isn't to win, it's to wear you down." JD glanced at the briefing and smirked. "Then they really don't understand who they're dealing with." Instead of backing down, JD took an unexpected approach. He used the lawsuit as an opportunity. Rather than playing defense, he went on offense. During a press conference on Capitol Hill, a reporter asked about the lawsuit. JD, standing confidently at the podium, gave a measured but piercing response. "This lawsuit is exactly why we need judicial reform," he said. "We have activist groups using the courts as a weapon to silence political opponents. This isn't about justice, it's about control." His words hit hard. Conservative lawmakers rallied behind him, calling for hearings on judicial overreach. Even moderates, typically hesitant to rock the boat, started acknowledging that something needed to change. The lawsuit, intended to damage him, was now fueling his movement. Behind the scenes, JD's legal team worked aggressively to dismantle the case. It didn't take long before cracks started to appear. The activist group had flimsy legal standing. Their arguments were weak. Soon, legal analysts were publicly questioning whether the case had any merit at all. Then came the breaking point. A leaked memo surfaced, one that showed the lawsuit had been coordinated with political operatives from Washington's inner circles. The entire case had been a sham, a desperate attempt to discredit JD before he gained even more influence. The public was furious. Within days, the lawsuit was quietly withdrawn. No explanation, no press conference, just a quiet retreat, as if it had never happened. JD Vance had won again. Sitting in his office after the news broke, he turned to Mark. "They really thought they could take me down with a phony lawsuit." Mark laughed. "They underestimated you, again." JD leaned back, folding his arms. "And they'll keep underestimating me. That's their biggest weakness." Outside, reporters were already shifting the narrative. The question wasn't whether JD had done anything wrong, it was who else had been targeted like this before. The fight against corruption and judicial overreach had only just begun, and JD Vance wasn't just winning battles, he was changing the